very pleased and honored to present to you tonight Dr. Abdul Aziz Saeed, the senior ranking member of the faculty at the university, at American University. Dr. Saeed is a professor of international affairs, is director of the Center for Global Peace, and occupies the Mohammed Saeed Farsi Chair of Islamic Peace at American University. Dr. Saeed is responsible for the creation of American University's Master of Arts in International Peace and Conflict Management. This program, says W. Scott Thompson, who is the professor of the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy, and I quote, is the most important innovation in peace and conflict teaching in a generation. Along with his academic and his administrative responsibilities, he continues to be deeply engaged in numerous international activities which demonstrate his commitment to finding new ways to work toward peace. Dr. Saeed has served as a consultant with the United Nations, the White House Committee on the Islamic World, the U.S. Department of State, as well as a member of the board of more than a dozen peace organizations, including Search for the Common Ground and the Center for International Dialogue, and I might add, and many more. Dr. Saeed stresses that peace begins with the individual, and that peace is a process, a way of making the world safe for all humanity. For Dr. Saeed, and I quote, the struggle for world peace in the broadest sense is more than the absence of war, and he stressed that with us this afternoon, but also is the presence of justice and freedom for all. In the author's postscript of the 4th edition of his book, and I happen to have a copy with me, the book is entitled Concepts of International Politics and Global Perspective. Dr. Saeed and his co-authors write the following, and I quote, religious traditions and spirituality, however, must be reborn if they are to respond to contemporary spiritual needs. Though most religious and ethical systems promote reciprocity and goodwill, their institutions and outlooks are too frequently identified with just those aspects of the past that contribute to current division and conflict. But very simply, spiritual values for the present and future cannot be partisan. They must speak to the universal human need for transcendence, unity, and justice. In light of this, Dr. Saeed has also written that politics is, and I like this quote, is inherently spiritual because our public life reflects our social values. It is the peacemakers and the peace seekers who continue to keep the vision before us of what our community can be and what our world can be. Dr. Saeed will be speaking to us this evening on the topic, Islam and the West, the road to reconciliation. Dr. Saeed.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you. Thank you. Conference, it's a pleasure meeting you, sir. We miss you in Washington. It gives me great happiness to see Ambassador Namba, who hosted me in Yemen when he was our ambassador to Yemen about 10 years ago. Getting closer. It was just before the okay. Islam. There are many ways of talking about Islam and the West. Probably, Islam is one of the most misunderstood religions. Not only by Westerners, but by Muslims. By Muslims too. By Muslims as well as Westerners. The title I am giving my brief talk with you this evening is Islam and the West, Three Stories. Three stories. The reason for my giving the talk this title is that the re-emergence of Islam in the international system in the last 50 years, following World War II, when Muslim states, or states whose majorities are Muslims, entered the international system, that the re-emergence of Islam into the international system has been accompanied by a great deal of storytelling, both by Muslims about Islam and the West, and by the West about the West and Islam. There has been this continuous storytelling. And I do identify my presentation as three stories. One story tells us Islam and the West are incompatible. They are incompatible. They cannot coexist. They clash. And you have read and heard about clash of civilizations. That's one story. Well known to you. The story, however, is not only told by Westerners when they talk about clash of civilizations, but Muslims do. Muslims also, some Muslims feel that that's a clash of civilization, that they are different and we are incompatible. Forgive me, I have had a sore throat. The second story tells us, well, not really, they are not incompatible, that Islam and the West can coexist. They are compatible, they can coexist. They can coexist. Now the question becomes, and I will talk about that, what is the third story? That's why I'm here. The first story has to be written by us. The first story has to be written by us because at this time we are between stories. We are between stories. And the first story will have implications not only to you and to me, but to the stories of the future, to future storytelling about Islam and the West. To this day, the dominant story is the first story. Let me talk about the first story first. The story of incompatibility. When I travel in the United States speaking to students, I carry in my pocket a $100 bill, and I wave the bill, I said, anyone who guesses what happened in 1492 will get this $100. When I'm lecturing about Islam. They will guess, but wrong, because they guess 1492 USA. They do not guess 1492 Islam. When Islam collapsed in Grenada and was pushed to the back waters of history. That's how the story goes. backwaters of history. Then from there we go to 1699, when the Ottoman Empire experienced its first push out of Europe. Then in 1724, when the Ottoman Empire experienced its second push outside Europe. Then the 19th century, where Islam found itself under siege by the West. Islam found itself excluded from history. Excluded from history. And the story of the exclusion of Islam from history is one that is not usually understood, not usually told, not usually analyzed, because my beloved people, most of what is written about Islam and the Middle East is written either by unloving critics or uncritical lovers. And we have to find a way out. We have to find a way out. And in the relationship between Islam and the West, that relationship for the last 200 years has been a relationship between non-equals. A relationship between non-equals, blemished interaction. When Muslims emerged back in history from that relationship, and when the West emerged from that relationship, I talk about World War II and on, the Muslims emerged feeling insecure and defensive, and the West feeling arrogant and insensitive. And the relationship has been that kind of a relationship of insecurity, defensiveness on the part of Muslims, arrogance, insensitivity on the part of the West. And underscored by media-driven caricatures, the way we see Muslims in media, be it here or here. That has been the first story of in confrontation between them. The second story is the story of compatibility and coexistence. Islam is not the enemy of the West. Muslims are not involved in establishing a new empire. Muslims are trying to re-enter history. That's what, from their perspective, they are trying to re-enter history. I don't know how much you know about the Redskins in Washington. They are in a way like Redskins. They are asking for respectability. They are trying to re-enter history. The story of compatibility is a story that is not much discussed in the West. Islam shares the same cultural roots. Islam is part of the Hellenic biblicist tradition. It is. It is part of that tradition. It is. It is part even of the Western political, modern Western political tradition. It's surprising to me how when I took my courses in modern political thought way back in the early 50s, and that was one of my feats for my doctorate, I read the books of the time. I passed my exam. I never learned from reading those books how Rousseau and Hobbes, modern thinkers, were very much exposed to Islamic political thought. That Rousseau spoke of Medina as one of the models of governance. That Hobbes understood, yet neither Hobbes nor Rousseau gave much credit to Islam, not for any bad reason, but it would have been not very political on their part to give credit to Islam at that time. They were not plagiarizing them. They are great thinkers. Islam is part of the publicist tradition. I remember when Assistant Secretary Shadid invited some of us 3-4 years ago when he was Assistant Secretary for Humanitarian Affairs to State Department to talk about how to combat religious intolerance internationally. We were about 30 persons, and the Assistant Secretary asked each one of us to say a few things. When my turn came, I expressed my thoughts to the Assistant Secretary that before we combat religious intolerance internationally, we have to begin at home. That in a country that has 6 million Muslims, we keep referring to the Judeo-Christian tradition, but never include Muslims in it. That in this gathering of 30 persons, I don't see Muslims. I see Christians and Jews. I don't see Muslims. I don't see Hindus. I don't see Buddhists. I don't see the new America. When I finished what I said, a gentleman raised his hand. He said, "I'm Rabbi Mark Goldman from George Mason University." I said, "Yes, Rabbi." He said, "You should thank me for you being here." He said, he was invited. He saw the list of invitees. He did not see any name from the Middle East. He said, "I gave them your name." That's on a high level. I'm talking about very high level. Things have changed, thank God. The commission that was created has Muslims in it, and it's happening. But Islam is also a true bridge between the Abrahamic traditions and the East. Persia, India, Pakistan, Malaysia, historically as well. I mean, it is really a true bridge between its own Hellenic, biblicist, Abrahamic tradition and the East. Compatibility. We talk about democracy, and I have not read the article that you have. Oftentimes, I am invited to focus on the theme, is democracy compatible with Islam? What has happened, however, we in the West, we have equated our forms of democracy with the substance of democracy. Meaning, we have equated our forms, and we have many forms of Western democracy. There's the American, Swiss, Swedish, many other forms. We have equated our form with the substance of democracy, and we have said, well, since they do not conform to our form, they cannot be democratic. Ladies and gentlemen, the substance of democracy is one, no question about that. But the forms of democracy are cast in the history and the culture of the people. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that in the Islamic world at this time, there are democratic Islamic states either in a Muslim way or Western way. That's not my point. Iran is trying to play with that. And if one wants to talk about Iran, maybe we can talk about it. But the point I'm trying to make, the substance of democracy is a society that has processes of participation for decision making, that has safeguards for dissent. That's democracy. The forms of democracy have to do with how that participation is to be affected. So what we have concluded in our talk about democracy, we have concluded that that democracy is equal to the kind of institutions, that institutions are the only important thing, and they are our institutions. But democracy is both institution and participation. Question becomes, Can you be democratic and Muslim? Yes. Question, are there in Islam precepts that are undemocratic? Yes, as there are in Christianity and Judaism and Hinduism and Buddhism. The question becomes, what's happening? But many things are happening, and I hope we can discuss that. In my judgment, at this time, in the Islamic world, I don't see as yet a vision of democracy, that I can call it an Islamic vision. We are struggling with it, trying to deal with it, trying to develop it. Another question, can you be Muslim and developed? Well, again, here we have done the same thing. We have equated development with Westernization. If the question is, can you be Muslim and Westernized, you could be a wannabe, yeah, and you could be like the Shah of Iran and you'd be kicked out. Or you could be like Muammar Gaddafi and become marginalized by the West. For me, development includes modernization and humanization. Now, I'm not saying that Westernization cannot be part of it. It can. But again, my beloved people, I was in Cairo recently and called my friend Dr. Mohammed Shaban, a prominent psychiatrist. Told him I wanted to go and visit him at home. He gave me instructions how to visit him. He said, well, it's too complicated. He said, take a taxi and tell the taxi to bring you to Mohandisin and let him drop you at Wimpy's, and I will beat him. I said, fine. By the time I was able to find the taxi, all I could remember is Wimpy's. I forgot Mohandisin. So I told the taxi driver, I said, Salaam alaikum, alaikum salam, could you take me to Wimpy's? He looks at me in amazement. He said, which Wimpy's? Well, I said, how many Wimpy's do you have? Well, he said, Wimpy Haram, Wimpy Giza, Wimpy Husseini, Wimpy Mohandisin. I said, Mohandisin. He said, okay. So I went to Mohandisin and told Muhammad was waiting. I told Muhammad the story. Muhammad looked at me and said, Abdul Aziz, he said, I know your favorite mosque in here is Al-Hussein Mosque. He said, next time when we come to Egypt, and you ask the driver to take you to the Al-Hussein Mosque, unless you tell him the mosque next to Wimpy, he would not know which one I go. And don't forget, this is a real threat to Islam, and also with globalization. But let me go to development and modernization. Yes, you can be Muslim, you can be developed, you can be progressive. Muslims have had their share of achievements historically. They have had their share of decline historically. They have had their share of collapse historically. No question about that. But yes, I disagree with Bernard Lewis and Sam Huntington when they claim that you cannot be progressive and be Muslim. Nonsense. Nonsense. You can, they happen. And also they have collapsed. Westernized, that's a different story. I think one of the many errors that was committed by international laws in recent years. Take Pakistan. The first state to declare itself Islamic is Pakistan. Yet there was nothing Islamic about Pakistan except the name Islamic. Pakistan patterned itself after Western institutions, and ever since has had some serious problems. So what has happened with many Muslim leaders, they find themselves caught in a dilemma. Either reflect or reject the West. If they reflect the West, they become marginalized domestically. If they reject the West, they become marginalized internationally. Now that has been a problem historically in the 20th century for Muslim countries, Muslim states. Yes, they can be. What is development? Development is a society participating in the growth, human, economic, and other growth of its own people, of its own society. It has that humanization, and Islam has that too. Third story. Third story, my beloved people, the first story for me is an exercise in futility. Let the Bernard Lewis's and Sam Huntington's of the world write books, but it is an exercise in futility. And let also the Muslim fundamentalists write books, and that's an exercise in futility. Both sides. The second story is a move beyond storytelling. The third one is yet to be written. Let me suggest a possible script for the new story, for the first story. Step number one, to move beyond arrogance and cynicism. Of both sides. What arrogance and cynicism has done, it has created paranoia and fear. The paranoia and fear of the West regarding Islam and of Islam regarding the West are mirror images. They mirror one another. I was in Oman when Rabin arrived in Oman, Prime Minister, late Prime Minister Rabin. And the day he arrived was the day I was leaving Oman. Oman is an Arab country, Muslim country. Two young diplomats were accompanying me to the airport since I was working in the diplomatic institute. And Hassan looks at me. He said, Abdul Aziz, we have 1 hour to wait at the airport. Who wants to ask you a question? Our king, our sultan, is asking us to work with the Israelis. He said, our religion tells us you can't trust Jews. How can you work with them? So we sat at the airport. I said, let's talk about that. Let's talk about our religion and Jews. And let's walk through the Quran, the Holy Book of Islam. Let's walk through the Hadith, the Sunnah of the Prophet Muhammad of Islam. And let's look at history. What we discovered? No, Islam doesn't say, don't trust Jews. Islam, at certain points, like other religions, had clashes with Jews and Christians. Yeah, that's true. But Islam acknowledges Jewish and Christian and other prophecies. I said, would Mahmoud and Hassan going to learn that? I said, in the mosque. I said, some illiterate imam, probably. Yes. What I liked about that experience was both young diplomats, they said, thank God, because we have always thought more of our religion than this way. So that's step number one. We have to move beyond that step. Step number two, the whole world needs the whole world. I have learned that from my experience. I have been an academician for 43 years and traveled in many countries. I have discovered that every people on this planet have a specialty, several specialties. That culture is a resource. Culture is a great resource. And Islam, like other traditions, also is a great resource. Its emphasis on solidarity, community, a collaborative concept of freedom, demystification of materialism. These are important aspects of Islam. Not that Muslims are living up to them either. Don't get me wrong. But this means Islam can make its own contributions. When I speak of the first story, I'm talking about one of the great contributions of Islam, which is cultural diversity. One of the many great contributions of Western liberalism is political coexistence, what we call democracy as we understand it. But in the 21st century, looking at ethnics and cultural conflicts, Islam historically has had a model for cultural coexistence, cultural diversity. And when we can wed the cultural diversity of Islam with the political pluralism of Western liberalism, it's dynamite. That's what the 21st century needs. What I'm saying, ladies and gentlemen, I have lived in the United States since 1953. And when I look at, and I travel back and forth, what concerns me is a retreat to a cultural ghetto on the part of Muslims, on the part of Westerners, retreating to a cultural ghetto. We don't call it that. We call it fundamentalism. We call it fundamentalism. We in the West are conscious of Islamic fundamentalism, religious fundamentalism, but we don't talk much about political fundamentalism. For me, fundamentalism is a pathology of a culture that occurs either when a people are threatened from the outside, they react, and the way they react, they take their traditions, they reduce them to a simple workable formula to protect themselves and isolate themselves from others. That's what religious fundamentalism is about, be it Muslim, Christian, Jewish. But there's also political fundamentalism, which also occurs. It's also a type of a pathology of a culture which also occurs when a people are hegemonic, like we are in the United States. And when a people are hegemonic, they also, like the other fundamentalism, they take their tradition, in this case Western liberal tradition, reduce it to a narrow workable formula to justify their hegemony. In both cases, it is a retreat. It's a retreat to the ghettos. It is. When I say retreat to the ghettos, it is a form of denial of the diversity of cultures, denial of the rich diversity of cultures. Whether we do it in the West, whether they do it, it is truly a denial of the diversity of cultures. And I describe it as the compulsion to return to the ghettos. So in conclusion, Muslims can learn much from the West and are learning much from the West. Political coexistence, political pluralism, concepts of freedom, and the West, being dominant, is reluctant to learn much from Islam. That's part of the issue. There's a reluctance. It's happening, but it's happening very slowly. So we need a new story to tell. And to tell the new story, we have to know one another. I disagree with Sam on that. It's not a clash of civilization. It is the time for a dialogue of civilization. Dialogue of civilization. You and I, all of us here, have been we are the heirs of story number one, and we are the heirs of story number 2, but we can become the architects of story number 3. Thank you very much.
Dr. Saeed is graciously consented to respond to some questions, and who would wish to be the first to ask a question?
Yes, sir. If the U.S. had not engineered the coup that resulted in Mossadegh being overturned as Prime Minister of, President of Iran, what do you think would have been the subsequent history of Iran as compared to what actually happened?
That's, again, a very difficult question. And Congressman, you are violating the etiquette of academia. We academics, we insist only us should ask the difficult questions and should ask the easy questions. Probably, we don't know, probably, going back to Mossadegh. Mossadegh was a nationalist. He nationalized the oil. We didn't like that. The same forces that overthrew Mossadegh in 1953 are the same forces that are now calling for reconciliation with Iran. The business community, the oil companies, they want to remove the sanctions. That's what. I had the great honor of sitting at the feet of Roy Henderson, who retired from State Department in 1960 and came to American University, and I was assigned to be his assistant. And he was the gentleman who was involved in that. And he spoke a great deal about that. At that time, going back to my earlier statement, they had to reflect us, meaning they had to emulate us, or they had to accommodate, by us being the West, our interests. Maybe Mossadegh was not savvy enough at that time to evolve the way that may have precluded what happened later. But I remember from Roy Henderson, and his memoirs are not published, unfortunately. He was, at that time, our ambassador to Europe. Am I right? That's what he was. In 53, he was assistant. Yeah. Right. He mentions that when Zahedi, General Zahedi, who was the general when the Shah came back, goes to the American embassy and asks the American embassy, what should I do now? And the American embassy kept telling him, Stefan, he said, what kind of cables should I send? And literally, the American embassy had to tell him how to do it. So things may have been different. I really can't answer.
I'm wrong, he was ambassador.
He was ambassador. Because now it's coming back to me. He was ambassador. What may have happened? It may have kept Khomeini in his Western exile. Khomeini would not have come back. Not that there was a Khomeini. Probably. That was part of the pattern. Now we are trying to, I'm involved in dialogue with Iran. You may have read about last year we sent a team of wrestlers to Iran. We did dialogue. That's my group, Social Congress, we did send them. And they were welcomed by Iran, and they loved them. And then we brought them here. Iranian people have no resentment of the United States, none whatsoever. In fact, Iran and the United States have historically been good friends. But the event of American diplomats, the imprisonment of American diplomats, that soured the relationship very badly. And we are trying to emerge from that. But to go back to your question, we have learned some, We have not heard the great. We have heard some from that episode of 1953. But not again, it takes time to learn. Yes, yes, sir.
I worked on the Egyptian-Israeli peace accords, and we've been following the dialogue. What is your feeling as to what may happen as we watch this go around, either like this or like this?
Well, let me, at the outset, reveal my bias and prejudice. I'm in peace work. I'm in peace studies. When people ask me about Syria and Israel, they say, well, what has happened? They came to Washington a couple of months ago, nothing happened. I said, a great deal happened. They are not shooting one. They are talking one. It takes time. It takes time. Now, you are asking a question about the difficulties. What we have learned in peacemaking, what I have learned in working with peace research, anytime there is a tremendous disparity in power between conflicting parties, as there does exist between the Israelis, the Syrians, the Israelis, and the Palestinians, a third party that gets involved, as past the United States, as we have seen in Bosnia, usually helps the weaker of the two. In our case, we can't do that. We cannot help the weaker of the two. Hillary Clinton is running for the Senate in New York. Gore is running for presidency. That's the way it is. Right or wrong, I mean, I'm not saying it's good, bad, and different. These are the realities of the situation. We can't do it. Now, someone said, is there pressure only to be put on the Israelis? No, I'm not saying that. I'm not even mentioning it. Anytime there is that disparity, because what happens, one of the two parties to the conflict feels totally disempowered. And we have seen what happens when agreements are signed. Jordan and Israel signed the agreement, but to no avail. There is an agreement, and I'm happy that agreement. But having said all of that, it is going to happen. It's going to happen because the Israelis know they stand a great deal to benefit from peace with Syria. And the Syrians know they will lose nothing. They don't know how much they will benefit. They would like to benefit as much as they can. But the question that I also have learned from working with peace, working with Mandela, de Klerk, Latin America, the Arias plan, peace happens when leaders are willing to pay the price. And is Barak willing to pay the price? Probably yes. From the way he's talking, I get that impression. Is Assad willing to pay the price? From the way he's not talking, he may be willing to pay the price. So meaning his health is not very healthy. So leaders have to be willing to pay the price. In the case of the Syrians and the Israelis, they have agreed on almost everything. Almost everything. There's an old Syrian saying, and Dr. Puri may remember it, متفقين على البضاعة مختلفين على السعر. They have agreed on the goods, they are haggling over the price. And they have agreed by the price meaning how, when, who, how much. But it's going to happen with the Syrians.
So what you're really saying is a follow-on question, the Americans will be paying some of the price.
Oh, definitely. And we are trying to get the Europeans to pay some of the price. We are trying to get some of the Arabs to pay some of the price. We are trying to convince some of the Arabs it's in their interest, and it is in their interest. And the Syrians know it's in their interest because they're not doing well. The Syrian economy is totally stagnant. They are not even part of the global economy. But it's going to happen. It's happening slowly, gradually. But we learn in peace work, one has to do it very slowly. Very, very slowly. So I was in a meeting yesterday talking about how us non-governmental NGOs can help. How NGOs can do that. And we are doing that. For example, I was asked by UNESCO to organize a meeting of Arab and Israeli chief editors. We organized 3 meetings. I facilitated 2 of them, one in Paris, one in Malta. And what we did, we invited Israeli chief editors, Arab chief editors. That was 3 years ago, 4 years ago. Last one was last year. And brought them together. Not all of them came. Syrians did not come. Iraqis did not come. Saudis did not come. But Lebanese came, Egyptians came, Tunisians came, Yemenis came, others came. And what we were able to do with them is to agree among themselves, to establish a red hotline between them, to check the news with one another. They are doing that. This is great. And if you are looking at reading Israeli newspapers now, you will find out that in Israeli newspapers now there are articles published by Arab editors, and some of the Arab papers are doing that. So there are many things are going on to open the way to facilitate peacemaking. Yes, sir.
Can the monarchy in Saudi Arabia survive, and if it doesn't, what will replace it?
Ask Ambassador number one. That's a tough question. So far, I was there 2 months ago. There's a claim that the Saudi royal family protects Islam. Islam's protecting them. There isn't the kind of organized opposition to the royal family in Saudi Arabia. And thank God that it doesn't, because at this time, if it were to happen, it would be chaos at this time. What I have learned, sir, from working peace work, democracy is very expensive. Democratic behavior is a learned behavior. And when I say very expensive, education, consciousness, training, and those who oppose the royal family in Saudi Arabia, if they have this chance, it will be another fiasco, maybe worse. To answer the question, yes, it will survive for a while. It will survive for a while. I can't think beyond 5 years. Yes.
What do you think about the future of Jerusalem?
The future of Jerusalem, well, you see what happened with, for the first time, Dennis Ross came back, for the first time, and he said, I have faith. That's what he's saying, I have faith. Dennis Ross is the intermediary. What they are trying to do in Jerusalem is go to Abu Dis in the suburbs and make that a capital for the Palestinians. It's not going to do. It's not going to. That's a very difficult issue. Now, it would work if Israelis and Palestinians agree that Jerusalem becomes a joint capital, or if not a joint capital, that religious holy places will be under the administration of Muslim places, Christian, Catholic, or whatever places, and joint political administration. The Palestinians may even accept Israeli military security, they may accept that. But that is a tough one, meaning when I travel to Israel and I speak with Israelis, he's working as many do in the peace area. Until recently, by the way, no member of the Israeli peace now movement, meaning among the Israeli peacemakers, none of them would discuss with me and others Jerusalem. They said taboo, let's not talk about it. Now they are talking about it. Now they recognize that there has to be a resolution about Jerusalem for there to be peace between the Palestinians and the Israelis. Maybe international city. And there are so many plans outside there. That is going to require a great deal of education, consciousness raising, providing a sense of security to the Israelis. Yes, sir.
Regarding the India-Pak conflict between the U.S. nuclear power and the tensions to rise, what seems to be your solution?
Well, we, the United States, are in no position to prescribe to them a policy of nuclear policy. when we have our own preferences about nuclear preferences, and we have permitted others to have it. Having said that, personally, I'm totally opposed, like any person in my business, to any form of arms, whether they are mass destruction or even pistols. I mean, my issue with the United States, people talk about gun control. I said, don't even talk about gun control. Ban them completely. That's not, that's the thing to do. But I'm saying, I don't think, it's like us with the Israelis and the Arabs when it came to we talk about arms control and disarmament, and we apply one standard to the Israeli, another standard to the Arabs. That's the nature of the beast. Meaning our clamor with the Indians and the Pakistanis is not going to result in much positive reaction at this time. I wish to God that it does what I thought. And that concerns me a good deal. Yes?
Two questions, please. Firstly, do you hear now?
Louder.
Okay. I have two questions, please. The first is, do you see the growing Muslim presence in the United States, both from the African American community and from immigrants Muslim immigrants who come to the United States, and playing any kind of role in your third way? In other words, any kind of mediating role as a significant Muslim presence in the United States in the West? That's the first question. And the second question is, could you comment on growing religious tensions around Islam in Africa, most specifically in Nigeria?
Going back to your first question, affirmative. I'm convinced myself a good deal of the third story is being written by Muslims outside the Islamic world and by Muslims inside the Islamic world, but many Muslims. For example, one of my, since you mentioned Africa, one of my idols is Farid Esai, professor in Cape Town. Yeah. People like him and Muhammad, I mentioned Muhammad Shalan and others. But you see that, and you see it happening here in the United States because Muslims in the United States also experience themselves as a minority, and that is another fact. And yes, Nigeria, you know, Islam in Africa, many people who have not studied Africa, Muslims in Africa, we refer to them as flexible, accommodating, because the Maliki's, most of the Muslims in Africa are Maliki's, one of the very liberal forms of Islamic interpretation. Many Muslims in Nigeria, and I lived in Nigeria not recently, way back in '64, in Kaduna and Zaria, where we have the Muslim communities. I have a feeling it's a phenomenon, an anomaly that is echoing the kind of fundamentalism that we have seen in eastern parts, in some other parts of the Islamic world. It's a tragic situation because really the Muslims in Nigeria, Sierra Leone, and all of those, they have gotten along well with the other communities, pretty liberal, accommodating, intermarriages. So for me, it is, I'm really surprised. I think it is a manipulation of religion for political ends. That's what's happening. Sure. Yes, please, that's about it.
Could you comment quickly on another person that some in this room may have heard of, Fuad Ajami?
Yeah.
Is as controversial, I think, for Muslims as is Huntington and Lewis.
Yeah.
Argues that the latest catastrophe to befall the Muslim world is the failure of the statist economies at the time of the collapse of the Soviet Union. The failure of state-led economic development, ironically, because it has nothing to do with religion, in the Muslim world to transform the societies. Do you deal with that issue? And do you see that perhaps there is a real turning away from state-led economic development in
distinguished scholar on the Middle East, and as Ambassador Butler indicated, he has become controversial among Arabs. I think what started this controversy way back, Charles, was when he testified before Congress that the difference between Sunni Muslims and Shiite Muslims, one is suicidal, the other one is something else, and that Muslims didn't like it. It's cute, but they didn't like it. That was partly for a Muslim sake. His description of the state economy is accurate, and they are trying to move away from that. I mean, I was in Egypt recently, and Egypt is at the takeoff stage, no question about that. Egypt is at the takeoff stage, except they have one problem. They have a very heavy piece of luggage. And the very heavy piece of luggage is an Egyptian bureaucracy that is so heavy, so burdened, that it pulls them down. This is a state-centered system. But they are, I think Egypt will make it. I think Egypt will make it. Syria is in serious trouble. Syria, Iraq is serious trouble. Again, you have the dominance of the state-controlled economy. How can you develop if you don't have one commercial bank? Syria doesn't have one single commercial bank. It doesn't. So he's accurate in that sense. And as you mentioned, this has not to do with religion. What happened in the 30s, many Arab intellectuals became fascinated either with fascism and various forms of Marxist socialism, and they brought that to their countries. And it hasn't worked. It's not working. It's not going anyplace. And to that extent, I think that could. The other problem, my concern now about the Middle East, with globalization coming to the Middle East, what globalization does, it undermines the authority of the state from the top. With globalization undermining the authority of the state from the top, and fundamentalism undermining the authority of the state from the bottom. Now, when you add the two, with globalization coming to the region, in a region where constitutionalism is hanging by a thread, there are no strong constitutional governments. That concerns me a great deal as to what will happen in that region. And we are going to see the effects of that. Thank you for the question.
I wish to thank Dr. Saeed for taking his time in spite of a sore throat to those types of maladies to share with us this evening. My understanding is that he also is an advisor to freshmen at the university, and perhaps we might be able to appeal to him to give us an example of the Macarena. I understand that he has performed that on occasion.
What we did now, when I used to teach freshmen, I don't have that. Now, in the final exam, I was teaching one section out of many other sections. So when they take the final, we have the Macarena thing, and we have them dance for about 5 minutes. And then they go exam. Do you know that section performed better?
That was from watching you dancing, I'm sure.
On behalf of the Center for Conflict Management, I would like to give you this gift, and I need to let you know that this is unique to Akron. It is by an Akron artist, and I am also told that the wrapping is even more coveted than, so you need to be careful with the wrapping.